I'm John Lorden, and I've been looking into mysterious occurrences on my YouTube channel since 2015. Joining me today are some friends from Uncovered.com.
I'm Rachel Roslet, a forensic psychologist and head of case research and data at Uncovered.
I'm Andrea Cipriano. I'm also a forensic psychologist, and I'm a case researcher and content specialist at Uncovered.
Welcome back to LordanArts Uncovered. And today, we're looking into the unsolved murder of Elizabeth Barraza. In this episode, we head to Tomball, Texas, a suburb of Houston. Tomball is located in the southeast portion of the state, near the Gulf of Mexico. According to Wikipedia, Tomball is perfectly positioned between the low hills of Texas and the flat coastal plains of the Gulf, which made it the ideal spot for a railroad station. Back in the early 1900s, Thomas Henry Ball convinced a railroad company to put a station there, and soon people were coming in droves to Tomball. To thank him, the community renamed itself from Peck to Tomball. The city's motto is Tomball, Texan for fun. 29-year-old Elizabeth Barraza seems to embody that motto. Pictures show Liz with broad smiles, laughing with friends and family, and dressed up in various costumes that she had made for cosplay adventures. It's hard to imagine what would lead someone to gun down this woman in her own driveway while she's setting up for a garage sale back on January 25th, 2019. Let's learn more about this by turning it over to our case experts. Rachel, Andrea, how does this timeline come together?
Elizabeth Barraza, better known as Liz to her friends and family, began her life in 1989 in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. She was the youngest of two children born to Robert and Rosemary Nellie. Her family moved around a bit, living in Illinois, Missouri, and Florida before they ended up landing in Texas. She finished out her high school years at Klein Collins High School in 2008. And in the fall, she attended Stephen F. Austin State University.
After her freshman year, Liz transferred to Sam Houston State University, where she met her soon-to-be husband, Sergio. While there, the two adopted their beloved dappled dachshund puppy and named him Diesel. And after graduating from Sam Houston State University with a degree in psychology, Liz went to work as a data reporter for the Rosen Group. Liz and Sergio married on February 1st of 2014.
Liz had a big heart. She loved her friends and family fiercely, and she extended that love and kindness to people she didn't know. Liz was a Star Wars and Harry Potter enthusiast, and when she wasn't working as a data reporter, you could find her making elaborate costumes for her and her husband, Sergio.
They loved to go to the Texas Renaissance Festival dressed in costumes that they had created. And both were members of the Star Wars superfan 501st Legion, which is the Star Wars Garrison South Texas Squadron. According to StarGarrison.com, the 501st Legion is a worldwide Star Wars fan club that celebrates the Star Wars universe using costumes and props, in particular those of the Stormtrooper characters, Imperial forces, and other various bad guy characters.
I had a friend that was part of the 501st, and I learned quite a bit about it. They're really the top tier when it comes to cosplay. Like, they have very specific rules about their costumes and the level of accuracy, the amount of detail and research that they do. There's nothing else like it. Like, they're trying to get as close to, these characters walking off the screen as possible. If you've ever seen them out in force, it is truly a sight. I mean, it's like an actual military squad, just all wearing the same costume. Thankfully, I've seen them a few times at various races. I do races occasionally. Sometimes they'll come out for that to help support, especially if it's like a Star Wars themed race. Ladies, this story already grabbing at my heart. This is someone that lives in geek culture in a very similar way to myself. And then we've got this, this almost bizarre art imitating life or life imitating art aspect where it seems like this perpetrator might be in costume themselves in some way, but we'll get to that as we roll forward. Yeah, please continue.
I did pick up on that when I was reading about Liz, because it said she had 2 approved costumes. So that said to me that there was a very fierce screening process for what you could and could not wear for this role.
Absolutely. They take it's very, very serious. Yeah.
So her love of cosplay was not solely for her enjoyment. Liz used these same costumes to volunteer at area children's hospitals, visiting sick kids. She was also a cherished volunteer for the Peter Mayhew Foundation, which my research reminded me that he was Chewbacca in this series. And that organization is about showing the world how geeks can make a difference.
So on the weekend of January 25th of 2019, this was a busy one for Liz. On Friday and Saturday, which is the 25th and the 26th, Liz was hosting a garage sale to help offset some of the expenses for an upcoming trip that she and Sergio were taking to Orlando, Florida to celebrate their 5th anniversary. And the pair were visiting both Universal Studios and Disney, and they were scheduled to leave the day after the garage sale was supposed to end, which would be Sunday, January 27th.
So the night before the garage sale, which was Thursday, Liz and Sergio spent the evening working out the logistics of the sale and putting up some signs around the neighborhood advertising it. I think it's important to note here that they did not promote this garage sale on social media or take out newspaper ads. The only way someone would have known about it is if Liz or Sergio had mentioned it or someone saw the signs for it in the neighborhood.
That's a very important note because it's immediately where my mind went when I started looking into these details as well, because there's such a, not necessarily stalking, but there's certainly a level of planning that we're going to learn about as we unfold these details more. And it's the first thing I thought of. Did someone see this on Facebook? I guess it's probably keying back to like the Missy Beavers case for me, where, you know, she's setting up in the early morning for a workout camp. She was publicizing that on Facebook. And that's always been a question in that case was, you know, was there some level of stalking and they knew she was going to be there at that particular time because she was putting this stuff out in social media. But for this case, not social media, just signs in the neighborhood. But we know there's some level of planning. So that's a really hard intersection to cross there.
So at around 2:00 this next day, so this is the early hours of January 25th, surveillance footage shows the black Nissan Frontier driving by Liz and Sergio's house. And this car becomes important later on.
Okay, so we have a car. Well, we know the shooting happens somewhere close to 7 a.m. In the 6 o'clock hour. We're talking 4.5 hours before that. Also similar to the Missy Beavers case where people were wondering about the car that parked across from the church there several hours before. We're wondering if this is a planning step here. We at least have a confirmation. It seems to be this. It's at least the same type of vehicle, if not the same vehicle. So that is some considerable foresight in some way. Like, what? Unless you know about her life, why are you hanging out in the neighborhood 4 hours ahead? Like, what if she wasn't doing the yard sale? She wouldn't be out front that easily accessible. Does it change at that point? And all of a sudden you're going to a shooting at the front door, like getting close to that Ring camera. Probably, it seems like this person was aware of that in some way. So I don't know. Do you ladies have any thought on this 2:00 arrival and what that could mean?
It very much felt like preparing for the event, the murder that was about to take place. I'm a early to arrive person all the time. And I saw this as just making sure I had all my ducks in a row before they ultimately went off to do what they did.
I definitely, I think the same thing. This really indicates to me that there's a lot of premeditation, pre-planning. I also feel like this is the killer's way of visualizing and mentally preparing and like planning for their actions. I think it could also be a way for them to drive around and look for escape routes or to see how busy the neighborhood is, if people are parking on the street, that type of thing. Just really trying to get to see what the lay of the land is before they arrive.
That's a really good point because, like one of the first things I always look at, especially when we get to a map review on a case like this, is where are the local businesses that are more than likely going to have some type of surveillance. And to think of someone using that information in kind of a nefarious way, like I'm going to go to the neighborhood ahead of time. I'm going to kind of note where, I shouldn't take this street because we've got a bank they're on this street. They're probably going to have cameras all over that thing. Yeah, could be very, very possible. So how does this continue? What happens?
So a few hours later, the pair is up and getting ready for the day. And just after 6 a.m, Liz goes to her local Starbucks to get coffee. And on her way back, the front doorbell camera actually captures her returning home from her trip. And she makes a silly face as she enters the house.
Now, this is interesting to me because there's an opportunity there. We have the murderer is seemingly in the area at this point. We have her leaving, and that might be a regular pattern. Maybe that's something that she does frequently, going to her local Starbucks. Interesting to me that she comes back. She's just casual, comes up to the Ring camera, smiles in it. In that particular clip, we're not seeing anything like, the black truck in the background or anything like that. And admittedly, the footage is a little grainy, but still, I think something that obvious would be noticeable. We're not seeing anything like that. No interactions that she's having. Interesting to think that there's some potential that it could have happened at that point, but for some reason it didn't. And maybe there was something else going on where, the murderer was thinking this wasn't the right time, or people were out in their front yard across the street from her, something. It seems like something stopped it there, but I don't know.
Yeah. And for me, it was very ominous to see this happy-go-lucky person a few minutes before their death, just coming back, doing everyday normal life, being silly, presumably for her husband who would see that video.
Yeah, and interacting with a camera that is going to be a significant piece of evidence going forward in anything that happens with this case. Yeah. Yeah, certainly kind of freaky. Okay, what happens next? So
around 6:16 a.m., Liz begins to set up for her garage sale. Sergio helps her until around 6:45 when he has to leave for work. Right before he leaves, though, the Nissan Frontier is again seen arriving in the neighborhood on Kirkendall Road and then drives into the Goddard School parking lot. The truck leaves the Goddard School parking lot then, presumably to conceal itself on a different street.
And just a few minutes after Sergio leaves, this Nissan Frontier comes back into view of the cameras and travels to the Barraza home. And the killer can be seen doing a 3-point turn on Cedar Walk, parking behind Liz's car, and then exiting the vehicle where we can see them walk towards the driveway where Liz is still setting up.
Okay, so we've talked about a few locations here. Let's go ahead and just bring up a map real quick so we can give everyone a little lay of the land here. And honestly, there's a point that's kind of sticking out for me, but we have Cedar Walk Drive. This is where the Barrazas are living. The Goddard School of Tomball is here. And I think it's really interesting. Like, if we're thinking about the possibility that this could be a professional pulling into a school parking lot at that time in the morning, like, first of all, I'm already worried about cameras, like I was talking about before. School, probably going to have some form of surveillance system, but also just in terms of being noticed. Like, why is there a car parked at the school? School isn't going to be in session for a couple more hours. What's the possibility that maybe some staff or some teachers are showing up at that time? It seems like kind of a goof in a way. Like, you would think this person just park in front of a house, kick the seat back so you're not being seen. And then someone just thinks, oh, someone has a visitor and there's a car parked on the street. This is interesting to me. I don't know if I'm almost getting this feeling of like anxiousness or something. Like, why are they driving all around and doing all this with this?
Yeah, you took the word right out of my head. I was thinking anxious also. It makes me feel like it's possible they had possibly second thoughts, that they didn't want to go through with what they were eventually going to go through, or they were more anxious about being seen and idling in one place too long, where they didn't want to park around the neighborhood and, freak out somebody who's like, oh, that car I've never seen that car before. Why are they parked there? So they find any place that's public parking.
The amount of information that has come out, at least publicly, about their movement, they certainly have been noticed quite a bit. And that's for the info that's coming out publicly. I'm sure that police have many more occurrences in terms of the tracking of that vehicle.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking. It would be interesting to see if they can track the killer's movements here between the first drive-by at 2 a.m. until 4 hours later. Did they stay in the neighborhood? Did they leave it? What are they doing in between the time that they drove by their house at 2 a.m. and when they're showing up at the Goddard School here at 6?
Yeah. Now, over at uncovered.com, their map does note one other location, which was really just the Starbucks that she had driven to. And it's basically south on Kirkendall Road, just a bit south of all this. But this is the area that we're looking at. Pretty much primarily just a neighborhood. We've got a school. We do have some businesses, including, like I mentioned before, there's a bank out there. I'm thinking there's cameras around there. A couple of restaurants on the other side. Might be hit and miss in terms of cameras that are facing the road. But yeah, certainly some opportunity for more footage. And to be honest, we've got plenty of footage in this instance, which we'll be talking about here pretty soon. But all right. So speaking of footage, yeah.
Yeah, surveillance footage captures the murderer walking up to Liz at 6:52 a.m. Liz can be heard saying good morning, and then the person speaks to her for about 6 seconds. Couldn't really make out from the footage that we've seen exactly what they're saying. The gunman can be seen firing 3 quick shots at Liz, and then a 4th at point blank range when she has fallen down on the driveway. The murderer then sprints back to the truck.
So there are 2 surveillance videos that have come out with very different views of the crime. One of them is from Liz's own door camera. That one includes audio, which is extremely, extremely disturbing. The video isn't great on it in terms of showing details outside of the truck driving by. And then there's another neighbor's camera that really has the visuals of what's going on. Now, originally, I saw these 2 sources. They were separated. I've done some work to kind of do an edit of bringing them together. This video is pretty troubling. It's one of those things that isn't for everyone, so we're not going to include it in this episode, but on the screen right now, you'll see a prompt that pops up. If you want to see it, go ahead and click there. That's for the version that I've put together. It zooms in a little bit on the important spots and brings together the audio and video from these 2 separate sources. We'll talk all about it continuing in this video, but that's what we're going to do now. So let's take a look at that together, ladies. I don't know about you, but there's certain times where I'm reviewing media, and despite knowing what's going to happen, I just want it to be different. And with this piece of video, I can't feel more strongly about that. I wanted something else to happen. What I did notice in it is intent, a very clear method that seemed to be used. It seemed, based off the actual shooting, in my opinion, that this was someone that was familiar with that type of activity, maybe is a pro, or at least is certainly familiar with handling a firearm. There also seems to be some intent in terms of the discussion. Why is there any discussion at all? This could have been as simple as walk up, pull the gun, and shoot. And there's a little bit of a time gap in there. I think you said it was about 6 seconds.
Yes.
They wanted her to hear something before she died, which
it's almost as if they wanted her to know why she was dying.
Yes. Yeah. Which really implies some type of personal connectivity in some way. This really feels like it's part of the web of her social life in some manner. It's, I don't know, what did you guys hear or see in that?
I think, based on everything we know here about the timeline, it screams premeditation to me. Very careful planning. The person, except for that 6 seconds of discussion, the person was very focused on what they were doing. They drive up, get out, do that, leave right away. So, it says it was very well planned to me, and that it was someone who knew what they were doing. It had a very execution style vibe, I believe, to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that resonates with me a lot too. I think about the fact that the shooter shoots 3 times, and then they lean in to get closer for that final shot. And for me, I think of it's almost like they're doing it for good measure to make sure what they came to do is done. And I also think about the fact that the words that we know that she said good morning. To me, that's a pleasantry. I feel like if she knew the person personally, you would say, hey, so-and-so, or good morning, so-and-so. Go in and just say, good morning. To me, it kind of indicates like that this would be somebody who is, in her mind, someone who's maybe going to be a garage sale customer, something like that. I don't know that she would have known the person so personally enough to know their name, but the good morning is still shows her good nature.
The only wrinkle I could throw in that is if the person is wearing a disguise. And it does seem that this is someone wearing a robe. Some people think also a long wig of some kind and boots, it seems like. There is something about the walk pattern, which once again, there's a lot of parallels with the Missy Beavers case on this, but the walking pattern to me seems like, I don't know if there's a very big heel, but there's something in the person's stride as they're walking up. I don't know if they're cowboy boots. There's just something about the walk that's grabbing my attention where I don't know if they're very, very comfortable in terms of the boots that they're wearing. To think of the possibility that this could be a man, possibly dressed up as a woman, I think is some potential there. In terms of covering yourself up, this robe or this big dress or whatever is almost completely covering them up. If they have boots on top of that, the only thing that's really exposed is, kind of everything below their knee, and the boots are covering up a bunch of that, with a long wig that's going to possibly capture evidence as part of that. I mean, short of wearing some type of face shield, they are practically completely covered up in this costume that they're wearing. So the main thing I'm concerned about is it could actually be someone that she is familiar with, but then she's clearly not recognizing them as they're walking up, and she's probably not recognizing their vehicle because that vehicle, it's got a big decal on it, which I think some people would say, oh, that's our friend Bill. What's he pulling up at this time for? Sure. So that's, I'm kind of leaning towards man, but what about you?
I agree. There's a point in the video where you actually see her, and Andrea mentioned this before, like jump back or take a step back. And I don't know if that's the point at which the gun becomes obvious, or if it's some sort of recognition on her part of, oh, I do know this person. So that was very noticeable to me too.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Andrea?
I definitely, thinking about man or woman, I would lean towards man. There's something about the height that we kind of see in the video, the way that they run back to the car, sprinting after everything happens. That's something that I would agree with.
Okay. Well, to kind of couple up with that, I just want to talk a little bit about the audio in the Nest surveillance footage for a moment. First of all, this is just completely my analysis. There seems to be something else that's playing around the house that the Nest camera is picking up. It's either a television from inside or possibly her listening to something outside. There's just, it sounds to me just kind of like some produced content, and the audio level is high enough that the Nest camera is actually kicking on its microphone, but then the audio isn't quite strong enough and it keeps dropping its microphone out, and then it'll kick it back on and drop it back out. When it kicks it on, you do get to hear some of what else is happening, which at one point we know is her speaking. She's saying good morning as this person's walking up. There's a few little blips that happen right at the end, and I can hear a different tone that I don't think is that show and is clearly not her voice. To me, it does sound like a male voice, just based on my opinion of hearing that. Did you guys notice as we were playing through this clip in the audio, did you hear those few little
I did.
beats right before the shooting? Okay.
Andrea and I did some, analysis of various things that had cleaned up audio, and it did feel like it was a male. I think that based on statements that the Harris County Sheriff has made as well, that they also might believe that it's a male.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, looking online, there's quite a bit of discussion regarding what possible dialogue can be heard between Liz and the perpetrator. Did you ladies find anything in your research about any of these words being figured out outside of the good morning?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of chatter out there. We've found between us nearly half a dozen videos of people who say that they've professionally cleaned up the audio, and they have attempted to transcribe what they hear. It seems though that everybody is coming up with something different. There's a brand new dialogue every time. So between that and law enforcement not releasing anything other than the good morning that she mentioned to her assailant, I think this indicates that, we can't take these transcriptions as literal and this cleaned up audio as fact.
And Rachel, to your point too, mentioning this like brand new dialogue, and John, the whole idea of it could be other media that's playing that, taken at face value, citizen detectives trying to clean it up and trying to transcribe it may think that this is all happening in one time frame, including, the murder that happens, and not taking into consideration that some of the audio isn't happening with everybody, that it could be media, that it could be the news or the radio. And so trying to transcribe other audio to fit into the context of what we know eventually happens can definitely make this a lot more messy.
I think that's a really good point, especially because her Nest Cam was released individually and you can't see any real interaction. You don't know how long the person is there based on that camera's view. With the version that we've released, you get a very concise idea of, oh, they're walking up now. And really for that video is almost 2 minutes long. That interaction only lasts a matter of maybe 10 or 15 seconds. So yeah, to your point, cleaning up audio from before those 10 or 15 seconds doesn't make any sense because the person isn't even on the scene. They're basically in their truck still at that point. So Andrea, what happens after Liz is shot?
So after hearing the shots, 3 of Liz's neighbors actually call 911 to report the gunshots. And focusing on just the first neighbor's 911 call, this person calls the police at 6:53 a.m. and he says that he heard 4 gunshots before seeing a Frontier truck leave the scene. And he also reports that he saw the truck come back 58 seconds into this 911 call. And surveillance footage shows that the shooter is leaving the Princeton Place subdivision at 6:55 a.m. And then they do a U-turn to re-enter the neighborhood. The truck is captured on Liz's doorbell camera as it passes by her house. And police arrive pretty quickly, just 3 minutes later.
Okay, so once again, and we've touched on this before, there seems to be something frantic about the energy that's going on here. If this is someone that is considered a professional hitman of some kind, which it looks like by the act of the shooting, we've got all this extended time that they're there before, all this movement that's being noticed by neighbors, parking in the school parking lot, all these things that don't really seem like very strong experience. And then you have them leave the scene. And I don't know which way to feel about this because you could look at it 2 different ways. For them to come back a minute later is either showing they're really not too nervous about doing this kind of thing because they're going to come back to the scene and make sure that they actually did the deed that they were wanting to do. I don't know. I don't know if they were paid to do this, if this was personal motivation, whatever. Or once again, we're showing that kind of unprofessional nature that, a real hitman would have known for sure before they left. And once they're leaving, they're not coming back. But we're also not seeing if you're committing an act like that, I would imagine you want to get the heck out of there and not look back, not turn around. What could motivate you to come back to a scene like that?
It seems pretty risky behavior to me because that's another chance for, neighbors' cameras to pick up that vehicle coming back, another chance for someone to get a glimpse at this person's face. So
after you've called all this attention to that area,
exactly,
that gun is loud. There's no silencer on it. Yeah.
And that person, unless they really planned and looked at average response times for law enforcement, is really taking a risk of revisiting the scene with potentially law enforcement there. So this swayed me to think, yes, maybe this person perhaps has some experience with firearms, but may not be a professional, because that seems like a pretty risky mistake. And I agree that a professional would probably know that they were successful or not successful in what they were trying to do.
Yeah, and I love, John, that you mentioned the silencer aspect, that there is no silencer. I would also agree, Rachel, that a more professional hitman would have a silencer as part of their kill kit. Right. This is someone who just seems to, maybe have firearm experience, but they just have that one gun with them. And in terms of the returning, it also reminds me of the psychology of arsons, that arsonists often go back to see their work, and they become part of the stunned public that just watches the fire department. And could it be that he's coming back, or this person is coming back to check on their work? Maybe. Or is it truly that they are anxious and want to make sure that they did what they were supposed to do?
So police arrive around 3 minutes later. What happens then?
So interestingly, the truck is tracked on several commercial cameras as it leaves the scene. Unfortunately, they do lose the truck when it goes into area with no camera coverage. Liz was airlifted to Memorial Hermann Hospital in Houston, and unfortunately, she was pronounced dead the following day. It's beautiful that Liz wasn't finished serving her community. She was an organ donor. She gifted her heart, her liver, both kidneys and corneas. I read that her recipient spent a total of 8,144 days on transplant lists. So she really gave the gift of life after this tragedy.
A vigil is held for Liz on her and Sergio's anniversary, and over 100 of her friends and family are present. And of course, as a tribute to her, the vigil includes a raising of lightsabers and Harry Potter wands, just as she would have wanted.
And, once again, as a big fan of geek culture, like this image in particular is both amazing and heartbreaking. We're looking at a situation with a brutal, brutal killing. And I'm kind of wondering, do the police have any suspects in Liz's case? I also just want to ask, has there been, I'm sure someone has considered the possibility that this could be a murder for hire situation. Has her husband been cleared? Was he ever investigated? Is any of that information even public? What do you ladies know about this?
Mm-hmm. So law enforcement has been pretty tight-lipped about their theories on the crime. They'll only say that they believe the suspect was wearing a disguise with boots, maybe a wig. They believe, because of the way the killer executed Liz, there has been discussion that it was a murder for hire or someone who was familiar with Liz. In terms of Sergio, I can't recall reading anything where they have said that they've ruled him in or ruled him out. He does seem to be a very active participant in news conferences and sharing information about her murder. So I don't get the vibe that the focus is on him, but it's really hard to say given, how tight-lipped they've been.
Mm-hmm. I've seen a couple of sources that have talked about the fact that he might have taken a polygraph, but that information hasn't been publicly released.
Okay. When I first started looking into this, like especially off seeing the video, I was like, wow, this is like execution, murder for hire, like 100%. But honestly, now re-reviewing it, thinking more about these kind of missteps that are happening around it. So this person was there hours before, and that basic analysis that I was saying of, maybe figuring out an escape route, seems like they blew it, because police are saying, oh yeah, we've got him on commercial cameras up until a certain point. So what was that extra time about? And then this, hooping back a minute later is like the riskiest thing. I'm really not convinced that this is necessarily a professional at that level. Maybe it could be a murder for hire situation just with someone that isn't very, adept or skilled at it, maybe thankfully. Also, what I'm wondering, and I can't imagine that she was in very good shape for this, but Liz is alive for a little bit after this. Was any information relayed from her? that could be helpful with this investigation. I just don't know.
Yeah, I get the impression that she was in a coma from beginning to end. So I can't say that for sure, but that was my impression from reading through the articles.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised. Or maybe even an induced coma because the trauma to her body was so bad. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Andre, you have some thoughts on the murder for hire angle on this?
Yeah, I mean, going back to the idea of the murder for hire angle, part of it is interesting to me because it would require extensive planning on a professional's part. And I'm using air quotes because, as we've seen, there's some behavior in this case that would indicate that it's not all professional. And if this is in some way a murder for hire instance, this could be somebody who doesn't have any previous experience, which would, indicate some of that anxious behavior. But one piece of evidence that does stand out to me in this fact is that police didn't find any shell casings on the scene. And part of this, as we know, looking at the video, the killer doesn't stick around to comb through the grass and find casings. So this would indicate the person probably used a revolver, which is a common firearm used by hitmen, considering it doesn't leave physical evidence. To that end, though, somebody else who is not a hitman can have a revolver. There doesn't mean that it has to be a coincidence in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good point.
Others have speculated that the killer could be tied to their cosplay group. By all accounts, Liz was very devoted to the Star Wars fandom, and she was specifically involved with a group that was infatuated with the saga's villains. I think, of course, that since we believe that the killer used a disguise, there's that tie in there. I think the choice of their disguise is also very interesting as well. If you think about a professional hitman, I really can't see them getting up in a long-haired wig and a bathrobe to commit a murder. So I think we can possibly take away some ideas about who they might have been from the disguise that they chose to do. There has also been some online discussion that notes that someone she could have met within that community was personally threatened by a strong woman. This might also explain the perceived costume worn by the shooter. The other interesting piece of information, though I'm not really sure what to make of it, was discussion around why Liz had armed their home security while she was out setting up for the garage sale. We know from the timeline that was put out that her parents were alerted to something wrong because the alarm company called them and told them the alarm was going off, and Liz and Sergio were not responding to that. So they called the parents to see what was going on.
That's kind of interesting. Especially considering that, her husband was there earlier in the morning, kind of helps her get started. He leaves for work. Why are you going to rearm the house? Unless maybe, I wonder if there's any information about friends or family that are saying she was worried that she had previous threats, that there would be some reason for her to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wonder, too, if the gunshots would have triggered the alarm system. I don't know enough about the system they used.
Yeah. And sometimes they'll have sensors on windows, like for glass breaking and things like that. And I bet a certain amount of vibration could possibly set those off. But I would still think that you would have to have the system armed for those to register in that way. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. With this, I think about the fact that the newest detective on the case from Harris County Sheriff's Office, their name is Detective Wallace Wyatt. They spoke with the local news station saying that he personally believes that Liz knew her killer. And he says he feels this way because her physically calm demeanor is evidence in the video. He says that Liz doesn't jump from being afraid until he says that she sees the gun that the killer has. Ultimately, it's pretty difficult to know with this case with the quality of video that we have.
Well, that's interesting to hear that the detective thinks that she knew him, because it seems like, based off stuff we saw from the family, that the way she was greeting him seemed informal, like someone she wouldn't necessarily know. So we're kind of hearing it from both sides. And then, of course, we got the consideration of could have been someone she knew, but in costume. It's been 3 years since Liz was killed. Where is this case standing today, ladies?
Ever since Liz was killed in her driveway, investigators have been trying to find her killer, but they haven't had a lot of luck on their own. So now the police need the public's help. And with the Harris County Sheriff's Office, they're continuing to investigate Liz's death. And at the beginning of 2020, they announced that they had recently traveled to Miami to interview a person of interest. And they also announced that the reward fund had been increased from $20,000 to $50,000. And this is for information in her case that would lead to an arrest.
And I think Liz's father had some really powerful words for the community and for the murderer at the news conference. He said, quote, "Here we are, 3 years, doggedly engaged in a fight for justice for a young woman who was taken from all of us. Of the reward," he says, quote, "that is 50,000 reasons for someone to come forward and do the right thing, provide an anonymous tip to Crime Stoppers, and get this coward off the street." Police are asking for any leads the public might have related to this case. Specifically, they are still seeking tips about the dark-colored 2013 or newer Nissan Frontier Pro 4X crew cab truck.
And the family has been active in spreading the word about Liz's murder. They've been creating TikTok and YouTube videos, as well as participating in podcast interviews. And they've also created a detailed website about the crime, which is at whokilledlizbarraza.com. And Liz's husband, Sergio Barraza, he's spoken about the website recently where he said, quote, "I just hope this helps. And I hope someone steps up. We need someone to do the right thing, and we need justice for Liz, and we hope to get that this year."
And we hope Liz and her family gets justice this year, too. Dive in for yourself at uncovered.com's page for this case. The address is on the screen, and we also have a link in the description box.
There you can see all of our sources, our timeline, and the media on this case, including the Ring camera footage.
This case definitely needs more exposure. Please share this video and our page at Uncovered with any friends or family that you might have in the Houston area.
And of course, the biggest help is if you know something, say something. If you have any information on who killed Liz or on the vehicle of interest, which also has a pretty noticeable decal on the back, here's a picture of it. Tips can be submitted by calling the Houston Crime Stoppers at 713-222-TIPS. That's 713-222-8477. Of course, you can remain anonymous with them. If you don't have to remain anonymous, please contact the Harris County Sheriff's Office directly at 346-286-1600. Thank you, Houston Police Department, CBS 11, KHOU TV, the Houston Chronicle, ABC 13, KTRK TV, People Magazine, ABC News, the Harris County Sheriff's Office, the Daily Mail, MSN, CBS 11, Fox 26, New York Post, Reasoned Crime Chronicle, Inside Edition, WhoKilledLizBarraza.com, Gray Hughes Investigates, Dateline, NBC, The Unresolved Podcast, Web Sleuths, Reddit, and of course, Wikipedia. Also, a very big thank you to my friends at Uncovered.com and co-hosts on today's show, Rachel Roslet and Andrea Cipriano. Please join us again in 2 weeks when we look into another mystery that deserves to be uncovered.